Miss Carter, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent. The receptionist's voice crackled through the intercom, breaking the silence of the Monday morning staff meeting at Riverside Preparatory Academy. Professor Victoria Carter barely looked up from her notes, waving her hand dismissively like she was swatting away a fly. Tell them to make an appointment. Can't they see we're in the middle of something important? She said you'd want to see her now. She's the new director of the school board. That got everyone's attention. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand froze midair. The other teachers exchanged nervous glances. A new director? Nobody had mentioned anything about administrative changes. Send her in, Victoria said, her voice tight. The door opened and I walked in. My name is Lily Martinez, and I was 23 years old. The last time I'd stood in this building, I was 17, wearing my brother's hand-me-down backpack and trying desperately to become invisible. Back then, I was just another scholarship kid from the South Side, trying to survive senior year at a school where my monthly food budget equaled what some students spent on coffee. But that girl was gone. Victoria Carter's face went through about 5 different expressions in 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, something that looked a lot like fear. Hello, Miss Carter, I said, my voice calm and steady. It's been a while. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Opened it again. Lily? Lily Martinez. Director Martinez now, actually. I placed my briefcase on the conference table with a satisfying thud. Funny how things work out, isn't it? The other teachers were looking between us like spectators at a tennis match, sensing something big was happening but not quite understanding what. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she gathered her papers. I noticed. Of course I noticed. I'd been waiting 6 years to see that tremble. 6 years since the day she destroyed me in front of 32 students. It started small like most cruelties do. Little comments here and there. Lily, perhaps you'd understand this concept better if you had access to proper resources at home. Or, I know students from your neighborhood aren't exposed to cultural events. So let me explain what the opera is. I'd ignored it all, keeping my head down, maintaining my 4.0 GPA. I needed that scholarship to State University. I needed to get out, but then came that day in March, advanced literature class. We were discussing college applications, future plans. Victoria was in one of her moods, the kind where she felt the need to enlighten us about the real world. Marcus Chen talked about MIT. She smiled, praised his ambition. Jennifer Walsh mentioned Yale. More smiles. More encouragement. Then she called on me. And where are you planning to apply, Lee? Stanford, I said quietly. Their social innovation program. The classroom went silent. Victoria's smile turned into something else. Something sharp. Stanford. She repeated the word like it was a joke. Well, that's certainly ambitious. I have the grades for it, Miss Carter. And my volunteer work. Grades aren't everything, dear. She stood up, walking slowly toward my desk. I remember feeling my stomach drop, sensing what was coming but unable to stop it. Stanford is looking for students who will represent them well. Students who understand what it means to move in those circles. I can learn. Can you? She was standing right next to me now. Tell me, Lily, have you ever attended a formal dinner? Do you know which fork to use for salad? Have you traveled internationally? Do you even own appropriate interview attire? My face burned. Around me, 32 students suddenly found their desks very interesting. The truth is, Victoria continued, her voice getting louder, making sure everyone heard. Students from your background need to be realistic about their options. There's nothing wrong with community college. There's nothing wrong with trade schools. But reaching for places like Stanford when you don't have the cultural foundation, the social capital, the family connections, double quotes, she paused. Well, that's just setting yourself up for failure and disappointment. I stared at my desk, unable to speak, unable to move. I'm not trying to be cruel, Lily. I'm trying to help you understand your place in the world. Students from the South Side need to accept their limitations and work within them. It's actually kinder this way, rather than letting you dream about things that will never happen. Accept your place. Those 3 words burned themselves into my brain. She walked back to the front of the classroom, continuing the lesson like nothing happened. Like she hadn't just humiliated me. Like she hadn't just told me and everyone else that I wasn't good enough because of where I was born. I sat there for the remaining 20 minutes of class, my face hot, my eyes burning, refusing to let anyone see me cry. But what Victoria Carter didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that I'd been recording on my phone. Not intentionally. I'd started a voice memo earlier to record her lecture notes and forgot to turn it off. I had every word. And as I sat in that classroom, humiliated and furious, a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Keep this. You might need it someday." Now, standing in front of her 6 years later, I watched her squirm and thought about that recording, still saved on 3 different cloud services, still waiting. "Perhaps we could speak privately, Miss Carter?" I suggested, my tone pleasant but leaving no room for argument. She nodded quickly. Too quickly, gathering her things with shaking hands. As we walked toward her classroom, her domain, where she'd ruled for 15 years, I thought about everything that led to this moment. The sleepless nights, the 2 jobs, the student loans, the 5-year plan that became a reality. Victoria thought she'd put me in my place that day. She had no idea she'd actually just given me a blueprint for exactly how high I needed to climb to make sure she'd see me standing above her. And if you're enjoying this story of how one teacher's cruelty became her own undoing, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what happened next in that private conversation? Well, let's just say Victoria Carter was about to learn that some students refused to stay in their place. Victoria's classroom looked exactly the same. Same motivational posters about reaching for excellence. Same perfectly organized bookshelf. Same mahogany desk where she graded my papers with comments like adequate, but lacked sophistication, even when my arguments were flawless. She closed the door and immediately her demeanor changed. The fear was still there, but now mixed with something else. Defensiveness, maybe even a hint of that old superiority creeping back in. "Lily, I don't know what you think you're doing here, but sit down, Miss Carter." The role reversal wasn't lost on either of us. She hesitated, clearly not used to being given orders in her own classroom, but eventually sank into one of the student desks. I stayed standing. "Do you remember what you said to me?" "That day in March 6 years ago. I've taught thousands of students. I can't be expected to remember every conversation. Students from the South Side need to accept their limitations and work within them." I quoted her words perfectly, watching her face pale. "Those were your exact words. You told me I should forget about Stanford because I didn't know which fork to use for salad." Victoria's jaw tightened. "I was trying to give you realistic guidance. If you took it personally..." "Oh, I took it personally." I leaned against her desk. "Hard not to when you said it in front of the entire class. When Marcus Chen applied to MIT, you helped him write his essays. When Jennifer Walsh aimed for Yale, you wrote her a recommendation letter that practically guaranteed her acceptance. But me? You told me to accept my place. I don't have to listen to this. Whatever grudge you're holding, I'm not finished." My voice cut through the air like a blade. "After that day, you made sure everyone knew I was aiming too high. You mentioned it to other teachers." Suddenly, Mr. Peterson was questioning whether I really deserved my spot in a P calculus. Mrs. Richardson suggested I might be more comfortable in regular English instead of honors. Victoria shifted uncomfortably, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. She remembered. Of course she remembered. What she didn't know was how bad it got after that day. I went home and told my mom what happened. She was working double shifts at the hospital 16-hour days as a nurse's aide, coming home with her feet so swollen she could barely walk. She sat down at our tiny kitchen table, still in her scrubs, and looked at me with eyes that had seen too much hardship to be shocked by one more cruelty. "Mia," she said quietly, "people like her, they're going to tell you what you can't do for the rest of your life. The question is, are you going to believe them?" I thought about my father who'd worked construction until the accident that took his life when I was 12. He used to tell me stories about the houses he built, how the blueprints always looked impossible until you laid the first brick. After that, he'd say, It's just one brick at a time until you build something nobody thought you could. So I decided to build something nobody thought I could. But first, I had to survive the rest of senior year in Victoria Carter's school. And she made sure that survival came with a price. The recommendation letter I needed for my college applications, Victoria wrote it. I never saw what it said, but I can guess. Stanford rejected me. So did Harvard, Princeton, and every other reach school on my list. I ended up at State University on a partial scholarship, working 3 part-time jobs to cover what financial aid didn't. Victoria probably thought that was the end of my story. Girl from the South Side learns her place. Case closed. She didn't know about Professor James Mitchell, who saw something in my first semester sociology paper and became my mentor. She didn't know I spent every free moment in the library, reading everything I could about educational policy, social mobility, economic inequality. She didn't know I graduated summa cum laude in 3 years instead of 4 because I took maximum course loads in summer classes. She definitely didn't know about the master's program at Columbia that accepted me with full funding, or the PhD program that came after, or the research I published on educational inequality that got cited by the State Education Board, or how that research led to consulting work, or how that consulting work led to an appointment as a district administrator. And finally, to this moment, standing in front of the woman who tried to kill my dreams before they could even take root. The school board received several concerning reports about this institution, I said, pulling out a folder from my briefcase. Graduation rates for low-income students are 30% below district average. College acceptance rates for students of color? Even worse. Scholarship applications from Southside students have dropped 45% in the last 5 years. Victoria's face was stone. Our academic standards are high. Not every student is equipped to what? Compete with wealthy students? I dropped the folder on her desk. Funny thing, I spent the last 3 months reviewing complaints filed against teachers at this school. Yours came up quite a bit. Her composure cracked just a little. Those are taken out of context. Students these days think any criticism is Sarah Okonkwo told her African students have different learning styles and shouldn't expect to excel in advanced sciences. She's now a medical resident at Johns Hopkins. I ticked off another finger. David Reyes, you suggested he focus on practical skills instead of AP courses. He just finished his engineering degree at MIT. Should I continue? I've been teaching for 20 years. My methods. Your methods crush students who don't fit your narrow definition of worthy. I straightened up. Here's what's going to happen. The board is implementing a new equity program across all schools in this district. You're going to be the pilot teacher for this initiative. Absolutely not. I won't be forced into some politically correct. You will, or you'll resign. My voice was steel. Because if you fight this, I'll make sure every parent, every board member, and every local news station knows exactly what you said to me and dozens of other students. I have documentation, recordings, testimonies. The word recordings hit her like a physical blow. Her face drained of color. You recorded me? Not intentionally. But yes, every word of that March afternoon is saved in multiple locations. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. So here's your choice. You can participate in this program, learn to actually teach all students regardless of their background, and maybe redeem yourself. Or you can refuse, and I'll destroy your reputation so thoroughly that you won't be able to teach anywhere, even at schools that would normally overlook this kind of behavior. Victoria's hands were shaking now. The mighty teacher, who'd wielded her authority like a weapon for 2 decades, was finally understanding what it felt like to be powerless. This is blackmail. No, this is accountability. I picked up my briefcase. You taught me to accept my place. Well, I did. My place is above you, making sure you never crush another student's dreams just because they don't fit your definition of worthy. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Miss Carter, the equity program starts next week. You'll be working directly under my supervision. Weekly meetings, monthly evaluations. I'll be watching everything you do very, very closely. Her face was a mixture of rage and humiliation, but she couldn't say a word. She knew I had her trapped. As I opened the door, I heard her voice, small and bitter. You think you've won? I looked back at her. I know I have. The question is, are you going to learn anything from this? Or are you going to keep pretending that what you did to me and students like me was acceptable? She didn't answer. I stepped out into the hallway, where 3 other teachers were pretending not to eavesdrop. They scattered quickly, probably already texting the rest of the staff about what just happened. Good. Let them talk. Let everyone know that Victoria Carter's reign of casual cruelty was over. But as satisfying as that moment was, I knew this was just the beginning. Victoria wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She'd fight back somehow. Try to undermine me, maybe even attempt to discredit my authority. What she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for her countermoves for the last 3 years. Every step of my plan accounted for her predictable patterns of behavior. She was about to discover that the scared 17-year-old she'd humiliated had grown into someone who didn't just dream about justice, she architected it. 3 days after our confrontation, Victoria made her first move. I was in my new office, ironically, 3 floors above her classroom, when my assistant buzzed. Director Martinez, there's a group of parents here. They don't have an appointment, but they're insisting it's urgent. I knew what this was before they even walked through the door. 5 parents, all from the wealthy North Side. All perfectly dressed in business casual attire that probably cost more than my first car. And leading them was Margaret Whitmore, whose husband sat on the city council and whose daughter had Victoria for honors English. Director Martinez. Margaret's smile was tight and sharp. We need to discuss this new equity program you're forcing on our school. Forcing is an interesting word choice, I said, gesturing to the chairs. Please, sit. They remained standing. Power move. I'd expected that too. Our children attend Riverside Preparatory specifically because of its rigorous standards and excellent teachers like Victoria Carter, Margaret continued. This sudden change feels like you're lowering the bar to accommodate students who frankly aren't prepared for this level of academics. There it was. The same mentality Victoria had. They weren't even trying to hide it. I see Miss Carter has been talking to you, I said calmly. She's concerned. We're all concerned. Another parent stepped forward, Robert Chun, Marcus's father. The irony wasn't lost on me. This school has a reputation. If you start implementing these diversity initiatives, it could affect college placements for our children. I leaned back in my chair. Mr. Chen, your son got into MIT 6 years ago. Did you know that same year, a student from the South Side with identical test scores and better community service was told by Miss Carter to aim for community college instead? He blinked. I'm sure there were other factors. There were. The main factor was that she was poor and brown. I stood up. But I appreciate you all coming. It helps me understand exactly who's been organizing against this program. Margaret's face flushed. We're not organizing anything. We're concerned parents exercising our right to maintain a system that benefits your children at the expense of others. I walked to my office door and opened it. The equity program is happening. If you have legitimate concerns about implementation, submit them in writing through proper channels. But if you're here to argue that your children deserve better opportunities simply because you can afford the zip code, you're wasting both our time. They left, but not before Margaret turned at the door. My husband knows the superintendent personally. I'd be careful if I were you, Director Martinez. After they left, I sat at my desk and pulled out my phone. One text to the right person. They took the bait. Because here's what Victoria and her parent allies didn't know. I'd been counting on them to fight back. I needed them to show their hand, to be open about their resistance. Every meeting, every complaint, every attempt to undermine the program was being documented, but I wasn't doing this alone. My phone rang. Tell me you got it, I said. Every word. The voice on the other end belonged to James Rodriguez, the school board's legal counsel and, more importantly, a former Southside kid who'd graduated from Riverside 2 years before me. He'd faced his own version of Victoria Carter and understood exactly what I was building. Margaret Whitmore threatening you with her husband's connections could be considered an attempt to interfere with district policy. And that bit about not wanting to accommodate certain students? That's going to look fantastic in the board meeting recording. James had become my closest ally in this fight. While I worked on policy changes, he made sure everything was legally airtight. We'd been planning this for 8 months, ever since he called me about the director position opening up. Victoria will escalate next, I said. She's too proud to accept this quietly. Let her. We're ready. He was right. We were ready. But what happened next surprised even me. The following Monday, I walked into the main office to find Victoria holding court with 4 other teachers. They stopped talking the moment they saw me, but not before I heard enough. Completely unqualified for the position. Political appointment double quotes. Victoria saw me and had the audacity to smile. Director Martinez. We were just discussing the new curriculum requirements. Really? Sounded more like a discussion about my qualifications. I kept my voice pleasant. Professional. But since you're all here, perfect timing. I need to inform you that starting next month, all AP and honors classes will be required to accept any student who meets the baseline criteria, regardless of teacher recommendation. The color drained from Victoria's face. That's absurd. Advanced classes require a certain level of competency, which the baseline criteria measure. What they don't require is a teacher's subjective opinion about whether a student belongs in advanced coursework. I looked directly at her. Unless you're suggesting your judgment is more reliable than standardized metrics. One of the other teachers, Mr. Peterson, spoke up. Some students need more guidance. More structure. Throwing them into advanced classes without proper preparation is setting them up to fail. Interesting theory. Let's test it. I pulled out a folder I'd been carrying. This contains academic outcomes for every student Miss Carter discouraged from advanced placement over the last 5 years. Students she told to be realistic about their goals. Guess what? The ones who ignored her advice and took advanced classes anyway? 92% graduated with honors. 78% got into their first choice colleges. Silence. The students who listened to her? 63% didn't even apply to 4-year universities. I closed the folder. So, who exactly was being set up to fail? Victoria's face was red now. You're twisting statistics to support a predetermined conclusion. That's not how educational assessment works. Actually, that's exactly how it works. Data over bias. Results over assumptions. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Miss Carter? Your first equity training session is Thursday at 3. Don't be late. I walked away, hearing her sharp intake of breath behind me. But Victoria Carter didn't get where she was by backing down easily. That afternoon, I found an email waiting in my inbox. It was addressed to the entire school board, the superintendent, and half the district administration. The subject line: concerns regarding Director Martinez's policies and potential conflicts of interest. I opened it, already knowing what I'd find. Victoria had written a detailed complaint questioning my objectivity, claiming I had a personal vendetta against her, suggesting my policies were driven by emotion rather than sound educational principles. She'd been careful with her wording, making herself sound like the reasonable professional concerned about standards while painting me as the vindictive young administrator abusing her authority. It was well written, strategic, almost convincing. She'd probably spent all weekend crafting it, getting feedback from those Northside parents, making sure it hit all the right notes to make me look bad while making herself look like the victim of my alleged grudge. What she didn't know was that I'd been waiting for exactly this move. I forwarded the email to James with one line. Phase 3? His response came back immediately. Phase 3. I picked up my phone and made a call I'd been planning for 6 months. Professor Mitchell, it's Lily Martinez. Remember that favor you offered? I'm ready to collect. Professor James Mitchell had been my mentor at State University, the one who'd seen past Victoria's terrible recommendation letter and given me a chance anyway. Over the years, he'd become one of the country's leading experts on educational inequality. His research had influenced policy in 12 states, and he'd been waiting for me to ask him to get involved. I'll have the report ready by Friday, he said. Independent analysis of student outcomes at Riverside Prep over the last decade, with specific attention to patterns of bias in teacher recommendations and course placement. It's going to make for very uncomfortable reading for anyone who's been gatekeeping opportunities. Thank you. Thank me by making sure this actually changes something, Lily. Make it count. I hung up and looked at Victoria's email again. She thought she was attacking me. She thought by going to the board, by questioning my motives, by painting herself as the experienced professional dealing with an emotional young administrator, she could undermine everything I was building. She had no idea that every move she made was playing directly into a strategy I'd been constructing for 3 years. Every complaint she filed, every parent she rallied, every email she sent was just giving me more documentation of exactly the kind of systematic bias we were trying to dismantle. Thursday came. Victoria showed up for the equity training exactly 1 minute late, probably her small act of defiance, and spent the entire 2 hours sitting in the back row with her arms crossed, making her contempt for the process abundantly clear. The trainer, Dr. Amara Johnson, a Black woman with a PhD in educational psychology, didn't react to Victoria's obvious hostility. She'd dealt with resistant teachers before. But at the end of the session, as everyone was leaving, Dr. Johnson pulled me aside. "That one in the back," she said quietly. "She's going to be a problem." "I know. You have a plan?" I smiled. "I have several." Because Victoria Carter was about to learn something I'd figured out years ago. The real power doesn't come from standing at the front of a classroom telling students what they can't achieve. Real power comes from building systems those gatekeepers can't control, creating opportunities they can't block, and gathering evidence they can't refute. And the evidence I'd been collecting, it was about to bury her. The school board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. Victoria arrived early, dressed in her most professional suit, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than I'd spent on food in a month back when I was her student. She'd brought reinforcements. Margaret Whitmore and 6 other parents sat in the front row, a show of support designed to intimidate. Victoria kept glancing at them, drawing confidence from their presence. She had no idea what was about to happen. The boardroom filled slowly. Teachers, parents, district administrators. By 7-20-5, every seat was taken, with people standing along the back wall. Word had spread that something significant was going down tonight. James Rodriguez sat to my right, 3 thick folders in front of him. To my left was Dr. Amara Johnson. And in the back, deliberately inconspicuous, sat Professor James Mitchell. Victoria noticed the crowd and smiled. She thought the turnout was because people were coming to support her to protest the changes I was implementing. The board president, Maria Alvarez, called the meeting to order. "We have several items on tonight's agenda, but first we'll address the formal complaint filed by Professor Victoria Carter regarding Director Martinez's equity initiatives and alleged conflicts of interest." Victoria stood, smoothing her jacket. She'd prepared remarks, probably rehearsed them a dozen times. "Thank you, Madam President. I've taught at Riverside Preparatory for 20 years. In that time, I've maintained the highest academic standards and helped hundreds of students achieve their potential. Director Martinez's recent policies threaten to undermine everything this institution stands for." She paused for effect. More concerning is that these policies appear to be motivated not by sound educational principles, but by a personal grudge against me stemming from her time as a student here. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Victoria continued, gaining momentum. "It's natural for young administrators to want to make their mark, but using one's position to settle personal scores is unacceptable. I'm asking the board to review Director Martinez's initiatives and consider whether someone with such obvious bias should be implementing district-wide policy." She sat down. Margaret Whitmore started a light applause that a few others joined. Victoria looked satisfied, vindicated. Maria Alvarez turned to me. "Director Martinez, would you like to respond?" I stood slowly. "I would, thank you." I walked to the front, deliberately taking my time. "Miss Carter is correct about one thing. I was her student. And yes, I do remember my time in her classroom very clearly." Victoria's expression flickered. Something in my tone must have warned her. 6 years ago in March, I was a senior with a 4.0 GPA and dreams of attending Stanford. Miss Carter was my advanced literature teacher. I looked directly at her. Do you remember what you told me when I mentioned my college plans? She shifted in her seat. I gave realistic guidance to all my students. You told me that students from the South Side need to accept their limitations. You said I lacked the cultural foundation and social capital for schools like Stanford. You suggested community college would be more appropriate for someone like me. I let those words hang in the air. Do you deny saying that? That's taken completely out of context. I was trying to help you understand. Context. Interesting word. I nodded to James, who pressed a button on his laptop. My voice from 6 years ago filled the room, tinny through the speakers but perfectly clear. Stanford. Their social innovation program. Then Victoria's voice, dripping with condescension. Stanford. Well, that's certainly ... ambitious. The room went completely silent as the recording played. Every word. Every pause. Every moment of that humiliation preserved in digital clarity. Grades aren't everything, dear. Stanford is looking for students who will represent them well. Students who understand what it means to move in those circles ... I watched Victoria's face drain of color as her own voice continued. The truth is, students from your background need to be realistic about their options. Reaching for places like Stanford when you don't have the cultural foundation, the social capital, the family connections, that's just setting yourself up for failure. And then the words that had haunted me for 6 years. Students from the South Side need to accept their limitations and work within them. It's actually kinder this way ... double quotes. The recording ended. The silence was deafening. Victoria was standing now, her hands gripping the table. That was a private classroom conversation. You can't just... It was a public humiliation in front of 32 students, I said calmly. And I have the right to record lectures in classrooms I attend. But let's move past my personal experience. I nodded to James again. What you're about to hear, I continued, are similar recordings from 5 other students who were also told to accept their place by Miss Carter. The first voice was young, male, nervous. I want to study engineering at Georgia Tech. Victoria's response was sharp. David, students with your background typically struggle in STEM fields. Have you considered technical training instead? There are excellent VOCNAC programs... The next recording. I got a perfect score on the biology exam. Victoria again. That's wonderful. Sarah, but medical school is extremely competitive. Perhaps nursing would be a more realistic goal for someone from your community... double quotes. One after another the recordings played. Different students. Same message. Accept your place. Lower your expectations. Know your limits. By the 4th recording, several board members were shaking their heads. Margaret Whitmore had stopped looking supportive and started looking horrified. When the recordings ended, I continued. Those students? David Reyes is now a mechanical engineer at SpaceX. Sarah Okonkwo is finishing her medical residency at Johns Hopkins. Every single one of them succeeded despite Miss Carter's advice. Not because of it. Victoria tried to speak, but her voice came out as a croak. This is ... you're twisting ... I've helped countless students. Have you? Professor Mitchell stood up in the back of the room. Professor James Mitchell, University of Georgia. Director Martinez asked me to conduct an independent analysis of student outcomes at Riverside Prep over the last decade. He walked to the front, carrying a bound report. What I found was a clear pattern. Students from low-income backgrounds who took Miss Carter's classes were 43% less likely to apply to competitive universities compared to similar students in other teachers' classes. When controlling for test scores, GPA, and other factors, the single biggest predictor of a Southside student limiting their college ambitions was having Victoria Carter as their advisor. He placed the report in front of the board. This isn't about 1 or 2 incidents. This is systematic discouragement of students based on socioeconomic status. Victoria was shaking now, her carefully constructed defense crumbling. This is a witch hunt. We're not finished. James Rodriguez stood, opening his first folder. Over the past 3 months, we've interviewed 47 former students of Miss Carter. 23 were willing to provide sworn statements about similar experiences. He began reading. I was told my accent would hold me back in professional settings. I was discouraged from taking AP courses because students like me typically struggle. I was advised that some careers weren't realistic for people from my neighborhood. Double quotes. Each statement was a hammer blow. Victoria's face went from pale to flushed, her breathing quick and shallow. But perhaps most damning, James continued, opening the second folder, are Miss Carter's own emails. He pulled out printed pages. Here's one to another teacher. I don't know why we accept so many scholarship students. They drag down our college placement statistics. Another, these Southside parents have no idea how to prepare their children for academic rigor. And this one, from just 3 months ago, the new director is one of those affirmative action cases. No real qualifications, just checking diversity boxes. The room erupted. Teachers gasped. Parents turned to stare at Victoria. Board members were openly glaring. Those emails were private. Victoria shouted, standing up so fast her chair fell backward. You had no right. They were sent using district email servers, James said coldly. Which makes them district property and subject to review during investigations of discrimination complaints. Maria Alvarez's voice cut through the chaos. Miss Carter, sit down. Victoria remained standing, her hands trembling, her face a mask of rage and panic. This is because she couldn't handle honest feedback as a student. She's been planning this for years, waiting to destroy me. I have been planning this, I said, and my voice was steady as steel. From the moment you told me to accept my place, I planned to rise high enough that you'd have to look up at me. You're right about that. I took a step closer. But this isn't about revenge. It's about making sure you never crush another student's dreams because they don't fit your narrow definition of worthy. I never crushed anyone's dreams. Her voice was desperate now. I maintained standards. I gave realistic advice. You told a 17-year-old girl that she was too poor and too brown to dream big. My voice rose for the first time, emotion breaking through. You looked at me and saw someone who didn't deserve a chance because I didn't know which fork to use at fancy dinners. You measured my worth by my zip code and my mother's job instead of my grades. My work ethic, my potential. Tears were streaming down Victoria's face now. I was trying to protect you from disappointment. Protect me? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I got into Columbia for my master's. I earned a PhD. I published research that influenced policy in 8 states. I became the youngest district director in state history. Who exactly did your protection serve? The room was silent again. Victoria stood there, shaking, destroyed, as the weight of her own words and actions crashed down on her. Maria Alvarez spoke, her voice grave. Miss Carter, based on what we've heard tonight, the board will be conducting a full review of your tenure at Riverside Preparatory. Until that review is complete, you are suspended without pay effective immediately. No. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. No, you can single quotes T. 20 years. My reputation double quotes. Your reputation, Maria said, is exactly what's being reviewed. Victoria looked around the room desperately, seeking support, finding none. Even Margaret Whitmore was staring at her lap, unable to meet her eyes. This isn't over, Victoria said, grabbing her portfolio with shaking hands. I'll fight this. You're welcome to try. I kept my voice level. But Miss Carter? Every move you make, every appeal you file, I'll be there with more evidence, more recordings, more testimonies, more proof that you spent 20 years telling students like me that we weren't good enough. She stared at me, and in that moment, I saw her truly understand that she'd lost. That the scared teenager she'd humiliated had outmaneuvered her completely. Victoria Carter walked out of that boardroom with nothing. No job, no dignity. No allies, just the echo of her own cruel words following her out the door. As the room cleared, several teachers approached me. Some apologized for not speaking up earlier. Others thanked me for finally addressing what they'd quietly witnessed for years. 3 former students who'd attended the meeting hugged me crying, telling me they wished they'd had the courage to fight back when it happened to them. And if you're watching this story unfold and thinking about your own Victoria Carter, that teacher, that boss, that person who tried to tell you that you weren't good enough, subscribe to see how this ends. Because sometimes the best response to people who try to keep you down is to rise so high they can't ignore you anymore. 3 months after that board meeting, Victoria Carter's formal termination was finalized. The investigation uncovered 23 additional complaints from former students, and 7 from fellow teachers who'd witnessed her behavior but stayed silent out of fear. Her teaching license was suspended pending review by the state board. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to find work at private schools, but word travels fast in education circles. Nobody wanted to hire the teacher who'd become a cautionary tale about systemic bias. Meanwhile, Riverside Preparatory was transforming. The equity program I'd implemented expanded to all 12 schools in the district. Students from the South Side were enrolling in advanced classes at record rates. College applications to top-tier universities increased by 67% in just one semester. But the change I was most proud of wasn't in the statistics. It was in the hallways. I made it a point to visit Riverside at least twice a week, walking the same corridors I'd walked as a terrified teenager. Now students stopped me to talk about their college plans without fear. Teachers asked for guidance on supporting first-generation college students instead of steering them away. One afternoon I was leaving a meeting when I heard a familiar voice. "Director Martinez? Can I talk to you for a minute?" I turned to see Marcus Chen, now a sophomore at MIT, home for winter break. He was volunteering as a guest speaker for current students. "Marcus, how's Métis treating you?" "It's incredible." He hesitated. "I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For not speaking up back then. When Miss Carter said those things to you, when she treated you differently than she treated me. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't say anything. I just felt grateful it wasn't happening to me. I'd wondered if any of my former classmates remembered that day, if it had stayed with them the way it stayed with me." "You were 17, I said. "We all were. That doesn't make it right." He looked uncomfortable. "My dad was one of those parents who complained about your equity program at first. I told him he was wrong. Told him what Miss Carter did to you and probably dozens of other students. He felt terrible afterward. Is that why he withdrew his complaint?" "Yeah, he actually wanted me to tell you he's sorry." Marcus smiled slightly. "He also wanted me to tell you that my younger sister is starting at Riverside next year. And he's glad you're the one running things now, instead of people like Miss Carter." After he left, I stood in the hallway thinking about how change happens, not just through policy and documentation, but through people having difficult conversations, confronting their own biases, choosing to do better. The real victory wasn't destroying Victoria Carter. It was building something better in the space where her influence used to be. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that wanted to see her face the reality of what she'd lost. That moment came 6 months after her termination. I was at a coffee shop near the district office, reviewing budget proposals, when someone sat down across from me without asking. Victoria Carter. She looked different. Older. Tired. The polish and confidence that used to armor her were gone, leaving behind someone who looked genuinely broken. "I know you don't want to talk to me," she said quietly. "But I need to say something." I closed my laptop, waiting. "I convinced myself I was helping." Her voice was barely above a whisper. That I was being realistic, practical. That I was protecting students from disappointment by managing their expectations. She looked down at her hands. "But the truth is, I was protecting myself." "From what?" "From feeling like a failure." She laughed bitterly. "I came from money. Private schools, Ivy League education, everything handed to me. And I was a mediocre teacher at best. Deep down I knew that. So when students like you came along, brilliant, driven, working 3 times as hard with a fraction of the resources, it terrified me. Because if you could succeed despite every disadvantage, what did that say about me?" I hadn't expected honesty. Defensiveness, maybe. Bitterness, definitely. But not this. So I told myself that students like you needed different guidance. Lower expectations. And I convinced myself I was being helpful rather than admitting I was trying to make myself feel better about my own mediocrity by keeping others down. Tears slid down her face. I destroyed lives because I was too insecure to confront my own inadequacy. You're right, I said simply. You did! She flinched but didn't look away. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What I did was inexcusable. And you were right to stop me. What are you doing now? I asked. Working at a call center. Can barely pay rent. She wiped her eyes. My husband left. My friends stopped calling. The reputation I spent 20 years building was gone in a week. She paused. And I deserve all of it. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction at seeing her brought low. But mostly I just felt tired. Miss Carter, I didn't do this to destroy you. I did it to protect students from you. I know. She stood up slowly. For what it's worth, I'm glad you ignored my advice that day. I'm glad you went to Columbia, got your PhD, became director. You proved that everything I said was poison. She picked up her bag. And I'm glad there's someone like you making sure teachers like me can't hurt anyone else. She walked away, shoulders slumped, a shadow of the imperious teacher who'd once ruled her classroom like a kingdom. I sat there for a long time after she left, processing the encounter. Some people might say I should have felt triumphant. The woman who tried to crush my dreams was working at a call center while I ran the district. Classic revenge story, right? But revenge implies that her suffering gave me joy. It didn't. What gave me joy was knowing that students at Riverside Preparatory could dream as big as they wanted without someone like Victoria Carter telling them to accept their place. 2 years after that board meeting, I stood at the podium during Riverside's graduation ceremony. The senior class was the most diverse in the school's history. 78% were heading to 4-year universities. 12 had full scholarships to Ivy League schools. One of those students was Isabella Torres, a girl from the same South Side neighborhood where I grew up. She'd been told by her middle school counselor that advanced classes might be too challenging for her. She was graduating as valedictorian. During her speech, Isabella talked about the importance of having people who believe in you, who see your potential instead of your limitations, who open doors instead of closing them. She didn't mention Victoria Carter by name, but she didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew the story. It had become part of Riverside's culture, a reminder of what happens when teachers use their power to limit students instead of empowering them. After the ceremony, Isabella found me in the crowd. Thank you, she said, hugging me tightly. For fighting. For changing things. You did the work, I told her. I just made sure nobody could stop you. That's everything, though. She pulled back, smiling through tears. Knowing that someone who looks like me, who came from where I came from, could rise high enough to protect people like us. That changed everything. That night, I drove back to my old neighborhood. My mom still lived in the same small house where I grew up, though I'd helped her pay off the mortgage 2 years earlier. She was waiting on the porch, like she always did when she knew I was coming. Mia. She hugged me, and I was 17 again, crying in our tiny kitchen after Victoria Carter destroyed me in front of my classmates. I'm so proud of you. I was thinking about what you told me that night, I said. About people telling me what I can't do. And you asked if I was going to believe them, I smiled. I'm glad I didn't. I knew you wouldn't. She squeezed my hand. Your father would be so proud. You built something nobody thought you could. We sat on that porch until late, talking about everything and nothing. And I thought about the journey from that humiliated teenager to this moment. Victoria Carter tried to teach me to accept my place. Instead, she taught me that some people will always try to limit you based on circumstances you can't control. That systems can be rigged against you. That gatekeepers will use their power to maintain inequality. But she also taught me something she never intended. That the best response to people who try to keep you down isn't to sink to their level. It's to rise so high they can't reach you. To build something so undeniable they can't ignore it. To succeed so completely that their opinions become irrelevant. I didn't win by destroying Victoria Carter. I won by proving that everything she said about students like me was a lie. I won by becoming the person she said I could never be. I won by making sure she could never hurt another student the way she hurt me. And maybe most importantly, I won by choosing to use my position not for revenge, but for justice. Not to tear others down, but to lift others up. 6 years ago, a teacher told me to accept my place. Today, my place is creating opportunities for students who've been told the same lie. My place is dismantling systems that privilege some children while limiting others. My place is proving that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. Victoria Carter thought she was putting me in my place that day in March. She had no idea she was actually showing me exactly how high I needed to climb to make sure nobody else would ever be put in that place again. The best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. It's succeeding so completely that they become a footnote in your success story. It's building a life so full of purpose and achievement that their attempt to limit you becomes irrelevant. I didn't destroy Victoria Carter. I simply rose high enough that her opinion stopped mattering. And in the end, that was always the point. So if someone in your life is trying to tell you to accept your limitations, to know your place, to lower your expectations because of where you come from or what you look like or how much money your family has, remember this: their limitations are not your limitations. Their lack of vision is not your ceiling. Their fear is not your future. Take their doubt and use it as fuel. Take their dismissal and turn it into determination. Take their no and build something so undeniable that they have no choice but to see you succeed. Because the best revenge isn't making them suffer. It's making them irrelevant while you thrive. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever been told you couldn't achieve something because of circumstances beyond your control, leave a comment about how you proved them wrong. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're capable of more than others might believe. And subscribe to hear more stories about people who refuse to accept the limitations others try to impose on them. Because every time someone like Victoria Carter tries to close a door, someone like you needs to kick it down and build something better on the other side. That's not revenge. That's justice. And it's the most satisfying victory of all.